Boom, covers halftime live Monday Night Football Part 1, Cleveland Browns, Las Vegas Raiders. And it's a good thing it's not the late game because at the rate that this game is playing out, I think most of us would be falling asleep by now. A sluggish, to put it politely, first half. Raiders 10-0 lead at the break as the Browns go into halftime missing the field goal. Not a whole lot to talk about this game, but be sure you stay till the end of the video here because we're going to get into a lot about the next game from a prop, from a first half perspective. A lot of bets going on that are just coming in as the inactives are coming out. Adam Thielen will not be playing. I'm going to tell you how that's going to impact a couple of these numbers in just a minute. But as always, we're going to look at this game in question, halftime live. You're here for the Raiders and the Browns. And really, it's a tough game to find a whole lot going on in the second half because really the Raiders came out and it was clear that their plan was to take advantage of MJ Stewart. They were throwing at him everywhere they could on the field. But it's a Raiders team that, despite all the issues that the Browns have with the COVID situation and everything that they're dealing with, their biggest play in the first half was the pass interference, and it wasn't particularly close. Their long pass otherwise was to Josh Jacobs out of the backfield for 17 yards. Peyton Barber, the long run, 19 yards. But from a wide receiver perspective, Renfro's longest play, 13 yards. Barber, again, out of the backfield, 12 yards. Moreau, 14 yards with a couple of drops. Everything that the Raiders have been doing in this first half has been very condensed, very tight, and we're seeing what happens when Deshaun Jackson is not overly effective getting downfield. They're using him in a lot of run blocking scenarios, which is that's not what he's there for. I don't know. It's a misuse of his skill set, and we're seeing what happens when they're without Darren Waller, the biggest target for them on the offense. Really opens things up, and this is an offense in the Raiders that right now we're seeing it against this Browns team. It's tight. It's condensed. There's not much there. And from the Browns side, I mean, I'm not overly discouraged by Mullins. I would say I'm more discouraged about what they have going on out wide at wide receiver. Lots of drops, just no separation, no talent really on the field. But again, they're dealing with so many COVID issues. The offensive line, it hasn't been pretty, but considering how bad it looked on paper coming in, I'd say they're probably better than expectation. And I mean, the bar was incredibly low dealing with this Raiders pass rush, but they've been able to maneuver somewhat. Chubb has been completely shut down, 6 carries for 14 yards. It's tough to really come up with a whole lot. I'd be leaning under in some regard, whether it's the full second half under or the Browns team total under. But I mean, we're seeing this number awfully short, 20.5, not overly enticing for me. And then when we get to the team totals, the Browns are at 8.5. So, I mean, you're going to need a touchdown on the score to get over. Seems like a stretch the way they've been moving the football. So that may be worth considering, but it's just, I'm not ready to go under 8.5 with a second half team total at really any point in the NFL. So it's a pass for me on this game, but I would lean towards the under. Take that for what you want to consider it. An interesting prop. I'm just chucking it out there. It's going to be at a very big number, but potentially no touchdown score for the second half if you can find it in like the any touchdown score markets. Maybe worth a couple of bucks, but nothing for me in the first game here with Cleveland and Las Vegas. I'm just going to pass because my attention very much on the second game, and being able to do back-to-back games can sort of talk what's going on with the second game. So first of all, I get it out of the way. I have already bet the Vikings team total over in the first half. I sent it out on Twitter about 20 minutes ago. If you're following the Covers account, you would have seen it. I sent out 12.5 at minus 130. There was some people coming back and saying it's at 13, it's at 13.5. Look, if I could have bet over 13.5 at even money minus 105, I would have bet over 13.5. Where the book I played it at that had the amount of money I wanted to get down and the price less than 13 at minus 130, I took it. But if you're looking right now at your app and you're seeing over 13.5 or over 13, bet it. Really like this first half over. The reasoning here, it's very, very simple, right? Look at the Bears depth chart for what they have going on in the secondary. And it's not necessarily news, but when we're looking at this Bears team and you're trying to put some name value on some of these guys that are in the secondary. I mean, I'm reading off names and it's Teez Tabor, Kindle Vildor, D. Virgin, Michael Joseph, Thomas Graham. I mean, these sound more like lawyers at your local law firm in a small town somewhere than they do recognized names in an NFL secondary. Every starter for the Bears secondary is out of this game, right? And so this is still a Bears defense who potentially has a couple names up front, but I'll get to that in a second, that I think they can figure it out to some extent. I mean, this is a practice squad secondary, but there's decent pieces up front. So I think as the game progresses, you can sort of figure it out. Early in the game, this is going to be a mess because practices were all a disaster so far this week for the Bears. They're going to be without potentially both coordinators as well as assistants on both sides. There's a lot of moving pieces for the Bears to figure out. And I'm looking at the Vikings offense. It's intact, less Thielen. I'll touch on that in a second, but it's a spot where I just think the Vikings are able to move the football, especially early in the game against this secondary. It's going to open up big plays off of play action. There's no weather issues in Soldier Field. I think the Vikings score early and often. There was very, very strong professional money in the market for the over that came in yesterday, brought this total way up. Vikings team total in the first half, if you're looking at 13 or 13 and a half, great bets. Really like that side. Now, where this gets interesting, just before we came on the air, the bets that I'm going to put in, Adam Thielen is not going to play tonight. There was a report that came out. It's not 100% confirmed, but he is very likely to go on the inactive list, which means that this is going to become a Justin Jefferson game. A good friend of mine in the industry who's widely respected as one of the best and most successful prop bettors anywhere when it comes to betting on football in the United States is on Twitter at Hitman428. And he deserves the shout out here because of the work that he does, but also the fact that I was going back and forth with him texting in the first half. And we were talking about what Justin Jefferson is going to look like specifically against this secondary. And without all of these names in the secondary, it's a massive potential for Jefferson to absolutely go off. And the market was basically priced in, assuming that Thielen was not going to be on the field. Because when you take Thielen out of this Vikings offense, we've seen games for Jefferson where he's got 13 and 14 targets. His target share goes way up. And where this gets interesting is potentially the one unit that is going to be intact. We're waiting on Roquan Smith and whether or not he's going to be active, as well as Akeem Hicks. Those two guys make an enormous impact in the rushing game as well as the receiving game out of the backfield for any opponent. If both of those guys go, Zimmer, who is a horrible head coach when it comes to situational game planning and play calling, is not, in my opinion, slow enough to screw this up where he sees that the Vikings may have trouble running the football on this Bears front, but they can throw all day. And it's a spot where, going back and forth with Hitman, we're at the point where it's a bit of a potential here for a Justin Jefferson stack. And so what that's going to look like is receiving yards over 98.5. You can get receptions over 7.5. You can get anytime touchdown score at minus 140. And then you can potentially look and play additional multi-touchdown score, anything like that. But when it comes to receptions, receiving yards, and the anytime touchdown score, Hitman specifically, very big on the over for the reception yardage at 98.5. That number is going to go up when Thielen is officially announced out. It'll get north of 100. I trust him all the way with that one. But if you want to take it that step further and maybe split up like one or two single bet, whatever that value is to you, over a couple different props, or if you're playing at a book where you want to potentially stack them all together in a correlated parlay, it's an option for you to consider. But from just a prop perspective going into this, I bet the first half team total over. Someone who I respect and the industry respects a ton is on that reception yardage over. And then there's potential to play individual receptions and anytime touchdown score on top of that. So that's a really good look for the game coming up that will keep you pretty well entertained and should be pretty rewarding to you come the end of the game. And the last note that I would drop on this. So if Roquan Smith is ruled inactive, he's been limited all week in practice, that opens up a lot of reception potential for Dalvin Cook out of the backfield. And running back receptions is very much a prop that's sort of correlated to how the game is ultimately playing out. When you think about the bulk of those receptions, it's 2-minute drills. It's in catch-up scenarios where the defense is in prevent. So it's not the best game scenario at that perspective, but with Roquan Smith out, who's the main coverage guy on any running back coming out of the backfield, Cook's number is very low because of how much he's struggled catching the football against the Bears within this matchup in the past. You take Smith out, that changes everything. So keep an eye on that as an inactive too. But from bets here, again, Vikings first half team total over, and then anything with the Jefferson stack, especially that receiving yardage over, which comes from a good friend of mine, Hitman428 on Twitter, who you should absolutely follow. So that'll do it for me for this game. Not much on the Browns-Raiders for the second half, but the Vikings game against the Bears is going to be a lot of fun to watch. And I'll be back at halftime with Davis Sanchez, and he'll have something for the second half for all of you as well. Talk to you at the